Can you guys hear me? Good morning, everyone. My name is Badawy, and I have with me here our General Manager, Valecia, Maclin Topping. Today, we're going to talk about how governments, public sectors, and regulated industry can accelerate their cloud adoption with software-defined sovereignty. I hope this is what you came here to listen to. So let's get started. So I'll start a little bit by describing some customer signals, what we hear from our customers. Customers ask us for data residency. Not only they want the data to be residence, they also want full control over it and over who can access this data. We also hear about operational sovereignty, which means the system, the processes, the operations, and the personnel should not be interrupted due to any geopolitical event or foreign policy event. There's transparency. Transparency is also a big topic in this space. Like, I would like to know everything I can know about your operations as a cloud provider, as Microsoft. This is about auditing source code, operator access. Did you ever access my data? And data movement between systems and so on. So there's all these requirements, all these restrictions, but they also want all of this to be in the hyperscale capability. I don't want to lose any benefit from being in the public cloud or commercial cloud. This means I want parity of function with everything that is today available on Azure or the Microsoft Cloud commercial services. In the cloud spectrum, Microsoft has different solutions. We have hybrid solutions based on Azure Stack and some hybrid management tools. We also offer fully instanced cloud. These are air-gapped sovereign clouds suitable for secret workloads. And they're typically unsegregated network domain. But we're not here to talk about any of these today. I want to talk about software-defined sovereignty. How can you add controls, guardrails, in the commercial hyperscale cloud in a way that you get the entire full cloud value of Microsoft without sacrificing on connectivity, on workload connectivity, and on any data residency you need. So this is what software-defined sovereignty is. We are talking about the commercial hyperscale cloud here. We believe as a company we have more data residency options than any other cloud providers with all the Azure regions we have. We have the most options to control your data and the strongest commitment to protect your data as well. We can meet in the commercial hyperscale cloud the unique needs of governments and regulated industry, we believe. And last but not least, we have strong encryption at rest, in transit, and we're going to talk about encryption in use as well. So we are ready for software-defined sovereignty in the commercial hyperscale cloud, and we're going to spend the next 25, 30 minutes to talk about it. I'm going to leave enough time for questions at the end. There's not a lot of slides, so let's get going. So why the hyperscale cloud? We believe it's where you can be more agile and flexible. You can scale up, out, and down to reduce costs anytime. This is where innovation is as well. AI services, data services are all cloud-first technology. This is where you want to be if you want to take advantage of this innovation. The hyperscale cloud also offers the most advanced, unparalleled cybersecurity than any other on-premise or private system. Azure itself has 65 trillion daily security signals that we analyze. There are thousands of Microsoft engineers working in this. We also know and think that the hyperscale cloud is the best way to accelerate delivery of your services through DevOps tools, monitoring, and so on. We also know that there are challenges, especially if you work for a public sector, for governments, or for a heavily regulated industry like a financial institution. There's complicated legislative and regulatory requirements. They're complicated. You don't know if you'll be able to comply with these while being in the hyperscale cloud. You don't know how to translate them into technical control. And also different types of data are classified in a way that also need different controls to manage them. We also know that you have concerns about protecting sensitive data. And you're uncertain, will I be sovereign in the cloud? Will I be able to control who accesses my data? Will the operator activities be transparent to me? These three is a summary of the problems we're trying to solve with software-defined sovereignty. We're focused on this in pretty much most of the tools, services, and guidelines we are building. We've seen the public sector, though, accelerating towards the public cloud in the last couple of years. The biggest catalyst, as you probably guess, is AI. AI is in the cloud. AI services are in the cloud. And it's really powering and driving cloud migration. Good news as well, regulations are adapting, which means we have seen governments adapt their rules and regulations to be more cloud-friendly and basically to embrace cloud architectures and control. And this has been a change through different countries and different governments we've worked with. And the one I'm most excited about, the cloud itself is more confidential, which means there's technology throughout Azure services that allow you to be not only secure, but also confidential. Confidential means even Microsoft, us as a cloud operators, we have no technical access to your data. So since we're talking about software-defined sovereignty, the idea of data sovereignty becomes really important because this is what's guiding our work. We're not talking too much about operational sovereignty here or any other types of sovereignty. What is data sovereignty? You as a customer or a partner working for a customer, you allow the customer to have full control over their data. They can control who can access it. They can also prevent Microsoft as a cloud operator from accessing this data. In addition to access control, data sovereignty means that data is managed according to the regulations and the laws of the jurisdiction it's sitting under. This includes data residency, in case data residency is a requirement of your regulation. And last, the cloud operator, in this case us, Microsoft, is transparent about its cloud operation. So in this space of software-defined sovereignty, data residency is the feature that is driving all the work we're trying to do. Data sovereignty. So I'll pause a little bit here and want to talk about a new technology before we hit the Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty solution that is really helping us and changing, I think it's changing the game in being sovereign in the hyperscale cloud. This is Azure Confidential Computing. It's a technology that protects and encrypts data in use during computation while the data is in memory. It adheres to the highest standard of the Confidential Computing Consortium. It's an open source forum that Microsoft co-founded with other technology companies. Confidential computing uses a combination of hardware-based encryption and secure enclaves. It ensures that data is protected from any unauthorized access, including protecting access from Microsoft operators themselves. The encryption keys are only accessible by the hardware. So it's not visible to Microsoft engineers, and it runs in a trusted execution environment. If you're running Azure Confidential Computing Services, you can do remote attestation to verify that you are actually running within a confidential computing system. We believe it's a huge game changer from a technology perspective and from a sovereignty control perspective in the sovereignty space. We think the future is confidential in the cloud. Sometimes you hear Microsoft talking about the confidential cloud, not only the confidential computing. And just as you probably already know that data at rest, encryption of data at rest and in transit have become a standard, confidential computing adds this additional leg that data is also encrypted in use. This is a huge topic. There was a session about it, I believe yesterday or 2 days ago. We're not going to go in depth, but I'm mentioning it here because it's a pretty important step from a confidential perspective that will help you be sovereign in the cloud. OK, so what is Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty? This is the solution we're going to talk about most today. It's a solution for the public sector and heavily regulated industry that is designed to help you migrate, build, and transform workloads in the Microsoft Cloud while staying compliant, secure, and also sovereign from a data perspective. Like I said, this is a solution in the Microsoft public or Microsoft hyperscale cloud. These are not sovereign, separated, or segregated clouds itself. Let's go a little bit more in details of what the solution is. You can think of it really as a portfolio, not a standard product. It's a portfolio of Microsoft and Microsoft Azure services running in the public cloud. At the base, you get all the public cloud capabilities, all the services that Azure offers, all the regions of Azure, and in addition to all the cybersecurity and the value of the hyperscale cloud. You are not compromising on anything in this space. Anything that is available in the commercial cloud is available within Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty. On top of this, we add a layer of compliance and transparency through policy, what we call policy packs, that allow you to easily be compliant or help you be compliant with the regulations you're under. For example, if you're a customer in the Netherlands, we have a policy pack for the BIO regulations of the Netherlands. We also add some transparency tools, and I'm going to talk about some transparency services later on in the presentation to give you more access to what the operator is doing behind the scene. On top of this, Cloud for Sovereignty has tools to enable you to quickly design architecture, deploy architecture that is compliant and sovereign by design. So you're going to hear me talk about landing zones, workload templates, and other. The idea is, without having to spend a lot of time designing architecture, configuring complex workloads, with one click, you can deploy environments that are compliant by design, and it's usually a repeatable architecture. It is a repeatable architecture. And on top of this is what we call our wedding cake. You can take advantage of all the actual sovereign controls that the Microsoft Cloud offers. I'm talking about sovereign controls that prevents even Microsoft operators from accessing your data. These are Azure Confidential Computing Services and other confidential computing services we're going to talk about in a minute. The presentation is not long. There's going to be about 10 or 15 minutes, hopefully, for questions at the end. I know this is a breadth. There's a lot of topics I'm covering here, so we'll have time for questions at the end. So under the hood, this is how the services, how Cloud for Sovereignty looks like, and the list of services we provide. On the sovereign control portfolio, there are the list of Azure Confidential Computing Services. These are things like Azure Confidential VMs, Azure Confidential Containers. Databricks can run confidentially today, and some other PaaS services. And as in the future, you're going to see more and more even PaaS and potentially SaaS services of Microsoft running in confidential computing. You can also take advantage of Customer Lockbox. What Customer Lockbox does, in case, let's say, a Microsoft support engineer needs to access your data for a customer support ticket, Customer Lockbox will add customers to the workflow, and they have to approve this access. So no Microsoft engineer, even for temporary elevated access to fix an outage or any customer support issue, can access your data without you approving. Customer Lockbox is a service available today on the majority of Azure services and Microsoft services like Dynamics 365 as well. SQL Always Encrypted. SQL Always Encrypted is a version or a flavor of SQL that also uses confidential computing to encrypt SQL Azure. Managed HSM. Managed HSM is another technology running on confidential computing. It is an HSM-based key management system running on Azure Confidential Computing. It allows you to, it makes sure that throughout the life cycle of encryption keys, Microsoft operators do not have access to these keys. Confidential Ledger. Confidential Ledger is another confidential service that allows you to store data records that are very sensitive in a manner that is confidential, that also prevents the cloud operator from accessing your data. I keep repeating this because we're talking here about confidentiality and sovereignty, not necessarily about security. So all of these sovereign controls enable these types of services, enable this type of functionality. And last but not least, another example in our sovereign control portfolio is Azure Monitor. With Azure Monitor, you can monitor for compliance, you can monitor for threats, and different other services that Azure Monitor provides for you. Going down the list of services of Cloud for Sovereignty, we have what we call the sovereign guardrails and guidance for you. I will go in details in some of these later on. This is the sovereign landing zone, our policy portfolio, which are the list of policy initiatives that help you stay compliant, and reference architectures that we provide. Think of these as governance or automation tools that makes it easier to deploy in a repeatable fashion, compliant and sovereign environments. And last but not least in this space, I hope some of you went to the theater session on the regulated environment management service in Azure. It's a new service in preview that allows all of this directly through the Azure Blade, through the Azure portal. It is API, it's also API enabled. It truly simplifies this whole thing. Through simple user experience, you can create landing zones, create environments, deploy, manage, and monitor. I'll talk a little bit more about the Regulated Environment Manager, or how we call it, REM, further down the presentation. There's also a lot of compliance and transparency services as part of Cloud for Sovereignty. One of them are transparency logs, which give you a report whenever a Microsoft engineer needs to access your data for a temporary period for a customer support request. And things like for governments or for countries that qualify for it, the government security program and the right to audit. And again, you're not compromising on being in the commercial cloud. All of this is running on the Microsoft commercial hyperscale cloud. So you have 60+ Azure regions. Like, it's an incredible, from a data residency perspective, we believe we are the best cloud provider out there. And you can take advantage of all Azure services that are commercially available today. So Cloud for Sovereignty is a generally available solution today. We have some features in it that are still in preview, but it's a generally available solution. About less than a year ago, we made the sovereign landing zone generally available. Excuse me. It provides an opinionated and easy to deploy repeatable architecture that is compliant and sovereign by design. It also relies on what we released, a special built-in Azure policy called the Sovereignty Policy Baseline. These policy initiatives are used and are opinionated especially towards data sovereignty. They enforce data residency. They enforce optionally confidential computing, things like customer managed keys, and specific policy designed for better or more data sovereignty. We also have released a list of policy initiatives to help you be compliant. We are in the process, and we're going to release more of these, to translate regulations into actual controls in Azure. So we have already out there, NIS2 is in preview, Italy's ACN, BO for the Netherlands, FedRAMP, CCA, CCM, V4, and New Zealand ICM. These truly are helping unlock a lot of this complication. So in addition to the architecture, it's really simplifying and unlocking many customers to actually adopt the public cloud. We also have released transparency logs. They are in preview. I will talk about them later down the slides. We have workload templates as well. Think of these as templates, this Azure Confidential Computing, Azure Lighthouse, that are compatible with the sovereign landing zones, their workload that you can deploy, and they're automatically compliant with the sovereign landing zone. There's plenty of documentation on Microsoft Learn. We are fully compatible, and we adhere to the best practices, if you're familiar with it, of the Cloud Adoption Framework. So it's everything we do in Cloud for Sovereignty basically adheres with these best practices. Documentation is on Microsoft Learn, and we have plenty of guidance as well. And what I'm most excited about is the preview service that we call REM, or the Regulated Environment Manager. It does all of this on a brand new Azure portal. And it's in preview today. You can join. And it's API supported. And it's also a user interface that simplifies the definition, and the creation and deployment of landing zones. OK, that was a lot. So what is the sovereign landing zone? It really is an enterprise-scale landing zone, if you're familiar with the concept. It helps you configure quickly an Azure environment that is sovereign and compliant by design. It really does this in an effortless manner. it heavily relies on infrastructure as code and policy as code to achieve this. And today, it's available in both Bicep and Terraform as well. The Terraform release is new. It was released about a month ago. And the Bicep version has been generally available since last December. It really enhances your security and regulatory compliance through the Azure Security Benchmark, following the Cloud Adoption Framework best practices, and the different policy we release that keep you compliant or help you be compliant as part of the Cloud for Sovereignty policy portfolio. Some benefits. It is truly a scalable platform application landing zone. It is based on the Azure landing zone. The Azure landing zone is not new. It's been proven for enterprise-sized customers with thousands of Azure landing zones out there right now running in the cloud. It also streamlines your governance. You can control allowed services, allowed Azure services, allowed regions, what policy you want to apply to your workloads, and all the data sovereignty policy that come with it as well. It also simplifies adoption. If you want to adopt confidential computing, which I spoke about a little bit today, it simplifies this. It has a dedicated management group that enforces that workloads under the confidential management group, always use Azure confidential computing technology. It also enforces confidential key management through Azure Managed HSM. And last, it really simplifies time to value and it really improves time to value and simplifies deployment through a one-click deployment and a single configuration file. So these are key benefits of the Sovereign Landing Zone. I encourage you to go and start looking at it and using it. It is generally available today. So here's a typical architecture, going a little bit deeper, of the Sovereign Landing Zone. The one-click deployment of the SLZ will typically deploy the architecture you're looking at here. You can imagine how complicated it would have been if you had to do this manually over and over again. You don't only have to do it manually over and over again. You also have to do it in a way that keeps you secure and sovereign. So in one click, you get this architecture. It's a hierarchy of Azure management groups. On one side, you have a platform management group. This manages your subscriptions, your identity, and your network configurations. And optionally, you can, if you're a greenfield new deployment, it also creates these subscriptions for you, especially on the platform side, and adds the necessary Azure resources. In the middle, these landing zones are called, we call them application landing zones. This is where you start adding your workloads. And as you can see, it's organized by default with 4 management groups, 2 reserved for confidential computing, and another 2 reserved for non-confidential computing resources. What happens here is the reason what management groups are used to group resources that fall under the same regulatory framework or same regulatory requirements. So for example, if you try to deploy a workload that is connected to the internet under the confidential corp management group, and that workload is neither confidential and is connected to the internet, you will be prevented from doing so, or your compliance will actually flag you that it's not a compliant resource. This is all configurable. This is out of the box, it's easy to deploy, but you can add management groups to it. You can remove management groups from it. And to comply with the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework, you also have a management group for sandbox subscription and another one for decommissioned subscription. So like I said, this is done through a one-click deployment via infrastructure as code. And soon with the preview of REM, it's done using the Regulated Environment Manager interface in Azure. This is how it looks like on the Azure portal after deployment. It is really, we're not doing anything outside of the norm of normal Azure. These are Azure management groups. It's a hierarchy of management group with subscriptions under them. So, which means anytime you can, post-deployment, you can configure it, change it, manage it. There is nothing hidden or basically special about it in terms of Azure technology. It's using standard Azure resources. One nice thing that comes with the Sovereign Landing Zone as well, it's an optional thing. You can deploy a monitoring dashboard. It allows you to make sure per regulatory policy that you added to it, whether your workloads are compliant with it or not. Okay, I'll switch gear a little bit and talk about our policy portfolio. As I mentioned, you are going to be automatically applying or assigning policy to your landing zones to make sure you are compliant with the requirements you're under. Our policy portfolio starts is a platform, is a layered platform, and it's configurable, and you can customize it to your need. But at its baseline, you have the security baseline. This relies on the Azure Security Benchmark and other Azure services that enforces the best practices in security. Moving up, we have the sovereignty baseline. These are special Azure built-in policy set that are geared towards enforcing data sovereignty. Things like data residency, Azure confidential computing, customer managed keys, and others. Going up the layers, then you apply the regulatory policy you need to be under. Depending on the country your landing zone is deployed in, depending on your industry, and sometimes depending on other regulatory framework you need to be under. These are things like I mentioned, the BO framework of the Netherlands, FedRAMP in the US, ACN in Italy, NIS2, and others. These are also, we will not, as Microsoft, we are going to be creating a lot of these policy initiatives, but we also are partnering with Microsoft partners to build as well. And we're going to provide tools within the regulated environment managers for partners to distribute these to their customers. And on top, last but not least, every customer might have their own requirements for additional compliance, and you can also assign these policies to the landing zones in addition to the policy portfolio we provide. Within the policy portfolio, it is not simply technical artifacts when you go and browse through the policy portfolio we provide. We also provide you the full regulatory framework, the official documentation, if you'd like, that this policy adheres to. We also provide the control mapping, basically what Azure policy maps to what actual control in the regulatory framework is. This is actually the hardest work in building those things, the control mappings between the regulations and the Azure policy itself. And last but not least, documentation, general technical documentation on how to use it. So the policy portfolio is not simply the policy set itself, but it comes with a set of documentation on how to use it and the regulatory framework it belongs to. Moving on, I mentioned transparency logs. What are these? This is a service in preview today. It provides details in case a Microsoft operator or Microsoft engineer needs to access for a temporary period a subscription owned by a customer. This typically happens if there's an outage or a customer support request. It's provided today as an email report, and it's available in preview for you to use. Here's an example of a transparency report. Most of the time, for most customers in the preview today, this report is absolutely blank. It's got nothing, and this is good. We rarely have to access customer data to address a support issue. So I think I have seen a couple of instances where these reports actually have data in them. What it has, some details about it, it tells you the date and duration of access of this temporary access. It tells you what subscription was accessed, the role of the engineer, the service name that was accessed, and the location of the engineer itself. OK, switching gear. Regulated Environment Manager. It's a key service as part of the Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty portfolio of services. It's in private preview today. You can reach out right after the session and help you join this private preview. We would love you to join this private preview. It's one place to learn about everything Cloud for Sovereignty on the Azure portal. It allows you through an easy interface to create landing zone configurations that create compliant architectures, assign policy, generate infrastructure as code, and deploy. This is something typically that in the past was done manually. Then we switched to infrastructure as code. We're elevating the idea of landing zones into a first-party Azure concept. Also through REM, you can access our policy portfolio. If these are custom policies, that part of the that policy portfolio, you can deploy them straight from REM. If these are built-in policy, you can use them straight away and assign them to your landing zone. And you can also sign up for transparency logs, which I mentioned there. You can, moving forward, you can see an evolution of REM to add more and more services in the area of guardrails, transparency, and monitoring as well. Two tools I'm really excited about that REM provides. The first one is the sovereignty assessment tool, or the assessment tool. This tool is pretty useful for brownfield. Let's say you have already started your migration to Azure. You're not using landing zones, or you're not using any of the features I spoke about today. You can run the assessment tool to assess how far you are from using best practices when it comes to data sovereignty. This includes data residency and other rules and best practices we believe you need to be sovereign. And it gives you some recommendations on how to move there. The next tool is the drift analysis tool. What drift does is, I'm going to pause here and describe it a little bit more. Using the REM portal, or the Regulated Environment Management portal, you can define desired state. So you can define a landing zone configuration that represents your ideal environment, how your management structure needs to look like, how your architecture looks like, and what policies need to be applied on each of the hierarchy of your landing zone. So once you have a desired state defined, you can compare this desired state to any live environment or live landing zone running in your Azure environment. And it detects change. So basically, you're not checking for whether policy have been violated or not. You're actually checking if somebody has changed the rules of what is compliant or not. That's a key change compared to other services like Azure Monitor and so on. I'm going to jump to the next screen to give you an example. This is a sample drift analysis report. It is telling you, for example, that at some point after you deployed your landing zone, probably an administrator has added another allowed location to your rules. So if you wanted all your workloads to be in the East US regions, now and this is how you defined your desired state, when you compared it against what's running, you realize that there is an allowed location in this environment that is right now in Europe. So something has changed in the rules itself. Another example on this report, it shows that there's a policy initiative that was added to your live environment compared to your desired state that you defined in your landing zone configuration. Things it can check for are whether you've changed the management group hierarchy, like a management group has been added, reparented. It checks for your policy assignments, if they've been added or removed, and things like allowed locations, like I'm showing, and log retention. We're going to be, this tool, like I said, is in preview, it's part of REM. And we're getting more and more feedback, and we're going to be adding more and more drift rules to the tool itself. OK, I think I am on time. It's a summary of a lot of technology here. It's not enough time to go deep in all of them. So I'm going to stop for question and answers. I believe we have 11 minutes left. There's a microphone right here. And Kevin's going to join me on stage for the tough questions. Go ahead. We have 11 minutes. Please feel free to ask any question in any of these services. If I can answer them, I will. If I can't, I'll refer you to a best way to get them answered.
I have a question.
Yeah.
OK, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm interested if I establish a confidential landing zone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested in ensuring with technical enforcement that Microsoft operators can see my customers' data.
Mm-hmm.
Services that are not allowed to do that. I'm particularly interested in like platform as a service offerings that are.
Yes.
Because I haven't been able to figure out what the mapping is to what, let's say Cosmos DB or
yes.
The whole suite of Copilot stuff is using confidential compute. So I assume having a confidential landing zone is going to rule out
Correct. It's not going to rule out. There are, let me answer your question. I mean, basically, what are the services in Microsoft today that support confidential computing? Is that an accurate way to describe it? So we are starting at the IaaS layer. Most IaaS services support confidential computing. These are virtual machines. We also support confidential containers. And we are moving slowly up the stack. We have PaaS services that support confidential computing. Azure Databricks, SQL Server always encrypted, key management like Azure Managed HSM, and others. And like I mentioned earlier, you can only see this list growing with time. We talk, like Mark Russinovich yesterday talks about the confidential cloud, not only confidential computing. If you search up for Azure confidential computing on the Microsoft Learn pages, there's a list of all services that today support confidential computing. I just listed a few for you.
As an additional follow-up to that, if you want to get really detailed, you can look at our confidential baseline. That's part of our policy portfolio. It actually enumerates in that policy initiative every allowed Azure resource. So not just at the service level, but the individual Azure resources that we've determined to be confidential today are listed in JSON in that policy initiative. And you can view that in clear text.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm local government, so I work in accounting in Maryland in the United States. I'm wondering what the difference is or why I would want to use this over my GCC high side.
I mean, it's for services, availability of services. As you probably know, GCC High does not have, or services are delayed to get into GCC High. So every service you see announced by Microsoft will be available to you for use.
So you're telling me that I can have like fabrics, for example, because I live in a world where my Entra is actually GCC.
That is.
So I could have fabric doing this deployment.
That's correct.
It would be under a commercial tenant?
It will be under commercial tenant, correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question, but just to follow on to that real quick.
Yeah. I don't see where you are. So, oh, here you are.
Right. This is not like step one or early process to actually phase away from Azure government, is it? And kind of now.
It's not.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay. All right. But the question I wanted to ask is there a way to leverage just some of the products in this portfolio? Like if I wanted to use just like transparency logs, for example, as opposed to like the whole suite. You
picked the toughest one. So potentially, yes, but the things you can, we have an open source version of our landing zones, so there are no restrictions as to where to use it. I think we have done some experimentation in it on government. So the sovereign landing zone is the best way to start. Other actual Azure services like transparency logs and the REM, or Regulated Environment Manager, we'd have to do it ourselves. But do you want to answer this more?
I was going to say, I think you're asking, are these point solutions, or do you have to use the entire ecosystem together? No, these are point solutions.
Oh, yes.
They are made to work seamlessly together to provide you an end-to-end experience. But if you only want a few policy sets from the policy portfolio and you don't want to worry about CAF and landing zones, by all means. If all you want is transparency logs, as long as you're in the commercial Azure environment, yes, you can just use that. The other thing I think we haven't mentioned enough is none of this costs anything.
Oh, yes, yes.
This is a free service. Pick whatever you want from here, leverage it so that you can be compliant in the way that works best for you. We are not charging you to be compliant. We want you to reach your level
on the cloud.
Yes.
So all the services are in a, yes.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How did I miss this from my notes? It's free.
Yeah.
It's always a good thing here coming from Europe, working for public sector.
Yeah.
I think this is a huge accomplishment, by the way, to unblock the blockers that we have in public sector in Europe. However, there's still this elephant in the room, which is the Cloud Act.
I knew this question was coming.
Sorry, man. But this is what I am fighting for, basically, on a month-to-month basis with many of my customers. So how can we deal with that? How can we protect, or can you make statements or some documentation in Learn or whatever that explains and clarifies how this will work if a gag order or something else under the Cloud Act is being executed, because that will help my job a little bit more as a consultant for public sector organizations. So I will come for that private preview, by the way, to you.
Okay, great. So the statement is already out there on the internet, how the US Cloud Act relates specially to the EU. We can share with you, but from a technical perspective, if you decide to use confidential computing, you are preventing us from accessing your data. So there is no technical possibility for us to actually see it because it's encrypted in use.
Well, and let's also, I think, to be very, very specific, we will never see unencrypted data. Let's not walk away with the impression that confidential computing is going to somehow prevent a CSP from being a CSP, right? Like storing data and transporting data. However, that data will be encrypted, and you will control the means of encryption and decryption. So there is no value to what is there because it is only encrypted.
And that's good to hear, although I have very tough customers, so I'm going to
yes.
ask a very tough question.
Absolutely.
My customers have the belief, and I really need some support on that, in no way there is access to the HSMs and the keys in it.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Valecia.
Yeah, and what I was going to add as well is Microsoft is committed to protecting customer data. There are statements that we have available that actually come from the president of our company in terms of our commitment to making sure that that data isn't accessed. You talk specifically about the Cloud Act, and in that regard, we actually have data that indicates, first of all, very rarely do we get those requests. It's probably presumed to be higher than what it is, and so we do have data that demonstrates that that data is not being released. And actually those requests, and in my prior life at Microsoft, I actually was the person that looked at all of those requests that come in. Many times they're coming within that jurisdiction, right? So we haven't talked a lot about a particular country seeking access for their country. So, but as it relates to the Cloud Act, because everyone's concerned about, is this US company then releasing my data? We have both statements that we can provide, we have the technical background that we can provide, and we have demonstrated data over a period of years since it was enacted that that's not actually happening. And so that, because that's what you're talking about, and I came out of public sector before coming to Microsoft. You want to know that you know that you know, right? And so that's information. The commitment statements are public. The technology which Kevin and Robert have walked through, you can demonstrate it technically, and then where needed, we have other data to demonstrate that that's not happening to the extent that people would suspect. It's very rare.
And if you'd like to learn more detail, we do have an industry expert booth. It's labeled Sovereignty. Please come by. I'm going to be there for 3 hours this afternoon. I will go into as much detail about this as you'd like.
So please feel free. I was going to say the same thing. Stop by our industry booth. We can talk in detail about the technology and stuff. This is not a gray area, the technology. It's a real control.
It's pretty explicit.
Yeah.
I'll try. I haven't examined it, but I'll try.
Yeah.
Also adding a European question. I love the fact that the Netherlands was on the board, but to take it broader to Europe, how do you see working together with Gaia-X initiative on this?
Take it.
Okay, so we are tracking with Gaia-X. Right now we are a little more focused on NIS2, EUCS, also putting investment in CSA, CCM v4, as that is a driver of other multinational initiatives that are going on in Europe. So we are aware of Gaia-X and staying apprised of it. At this time, we're focused on the landing zones and the policy portfolios that we believe will unlock value quickly. But we are aware from a Gaia-X perspective of creating those enclaves for sharing data, that will be a value add. From our perspective on this particular team, not across Microsoft, but on this particular team, we're waiting for a little bit more acceleration and adoption so that we know how to drive the architectural implementations. Let's talk a little bit more about it, because there's also the possibility of not us building it, somebody else. We have all the technology to allow partners or customers to do it. Absolutely. Like Kevin said, the next thing coming for Europe is we're working on EUCS. And also, it's in preview today, NATO unrestricted and NATO restricted as well.
Yeah, but I could imagine Azure services in GaiaX clearinghouse.
That's correct. That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, I think we did run out of time.
Yes, yes.
So thank you, everybody. Please, thank you. Please scan this and give us your feedback on the session itself. Thank you.